Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 151 with Chris Teague, DP of The Acolyte. Enjoy.
Have you been watching anything cool recently?
I saw you had an episode about sugar. I was watching Sugar recently, and enjoying that. Yeah, Colin Farrell's amazing in that. Just an incredible actor. I mean, and really, I don't know, and I think a very cool take on that character. I don't know. There's just like a real sensitivity that almost like makes him more mysterious. Because from the beginning, you just know so little about him, and he seems like almost like an archetypal figure. So I thought that was a fun watch. But other series, I feel like I've been behind lately. I haven't been staying on top of things, or I've just been like watching old movies. I watched Jacob's Ladder recently, which was really fun. The filmmaking in that is just spectacular. And I love a movie that kind of makes you question what's real and what's not, and Jacob's Ladder is so good at that, and just like playing with the uncanny, which is something we could talk about with The Acolyte, actually. Something that Leslie and I talked a lot about, like what the uncanny is and how you achieve it on camera.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of, the last first of all, to your point about not being on top of shows, there's a lot of shows. Yeah. It's a lot easier. We can just get the AMC A list and go like, all right, I'm here for 2 hours, let's go. And then move on.
Well, yeah, now, but I feel like every conversation I have on set now is like, on the one hand, as viewers, we're complaining that there's too many shows to watch, and now as crew, we're like, well, wait, they're gonna be making less shows, because that's not good.
Yeah. Have you? Does that? Pretty much everyone I've spoken to, whether on this podcast or in person, especially living in LA, everyone's like, nope, there's nothing happening. There's literally, we're all, like, is that your perception? Like, is your kind of, I suppose, working friend circle also kind of slammed, or have you guys been blessed with gigs?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, I was working through April. I just did a couple of days on a film here in New York. So there are people working here, but I think there's a sense that the work is going to drop off pretty quickly, and that things are going to dry up in the near future. I was just the show I was just on was shooting in New Jersey, and they said the film commission was telling them that last year, this time of year last year, they had over 20 shows going, and right now they have 4. I think there's just a lot of anxiety about the strikes and a lot of wait and see happening right now. So.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I saw the UK, some study was done in the UK where they went from like, I'm making these numbers up, but it was something along the lines of like 180 million in investment from the UK last year. And then this year it's like 12.
Wow. But I think the UK is going to do all right. I mean, the people I've been talking to, like my Acolyte crew there, they seem like everybody's working out there right now. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of work is going over there. So we'll see. I mean, I don't have the full perspective on everything. But.
Yeah. Well, and until because everyone's been saying, oh yeah, wait to see, what deals are signed with the unions or whatever. It's like, well, until that happens, we can't even guess, because that's what's holding everyone up. I'm less bullish on the idea that like AI is coming for everyone's jobs. More and more, that seems like it was incredible hype. And then like every day it's like, all right, well, actually it can't do that, but it could, Yeah. Like, oh, so this isn't, all right, it's not an immediate problem.
Yeah, it maybe not immediate. It feels like there will probably be this emerging genre of AI created, films, shows. I mean, and obviously with a creator behind it, manipulating it, but it doesn't feel like the first step is for it to usurp, the entire industry. But it feels like there's a world where it could get kind of a toehold, and in a way that might be interesting to see, what people can do. It's a very powerful tool. If it just feels like the means of controlling it is not very well refined right now. It feels like the way that, the kind of whole text prompt thing feels like it's designed to kind of prove its capacity for generating, material, but not necessarily for refining it, basically.
Yeah. Well, and also the you know, for an audience that is historically upset whenever there's a whiff of VFX used in anything, obviously it's the VFX they can see, but they get all upset. So I in my head, I'm like, I don't see it feels like a solution without a problem. Like I don't think the audience is going to turn around and go, actually, yes, I do want something that's completely AI generated, because I've loved that in the past.
Yeah.
The artificiality of it. Like it seems more and more people want real people making stuff.
Well, and I think you're right, and that's the thing I wonder about, is if AI allows a 16-year-old to create a sort of a sci-fi film that's like purely from their imagination, is it singular? Like that's what it goes back to. If they can refine it, if you can use it as a tool and have a singular perspective behind it, which it's definitely not there yet, but I could definitely see it getting there, in the not too distant future. And so then does it become, even though it's fully generated, and it will have this new aesthetic that'll probably feel very strange, but also very familiar in the same way. And maybe the creators will start to build an audience, with this tool. I don't know.
Yeah. I personally, having been on the internet since its inception, I feel like what's going to end up happening is it's just going to make very advanced memes.
Right.
Like if you look at, I actually saw, a couple guys were doing this interview and they were talking about how it'll enable, younger creators, marginalized creators, whatever, to make stuff. But it could be, their example was TikTok, not AI. They were saying like there's new tools where now younger people understand editing in a way that like you used to have to teach, and framing and not necessarily like excellent composition, but just like juxtaposition, whatever, Kuleshov effect, and but they make TikToks out of it. Not very often does a film come out, even though the medium doesn't quite ask for that. But even like YouTube, you don't really see a horrific amount of short films. You see a lot of people sitting behind a desk, talking about washing machines.
True. Yeah, that's true. It's not where we're trending. But if you end up having a tool that can create something that feels like it has scope and production value, somebody's going to want to take advantage of it. It wouldn't be the kind of person who's trying to be a personality or create a specific kind of following around their personal brand necessarily, but maybe, so maybe it's just a different type of person, different interest.
Yeah. I know you went to Columbia for directing, but are you generally a tech-oriented person?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that I am, especially when I was younger, I was very tech-oriented, and that was exactly the reason that I chose to go to Columbia, because they have very little to no tech instruction whatsoever. And I thought, I don't want to go massively in debt to have somebody teach me how to use cameras and lights and things, because I know I can tinker with that stuff and become reasonably competent. And I don't want to get kind of like stuck in that stuck in that world. I want to push myself and think about screenwriting and how to work with actors and visual storytelling from a non-technical standpoint, which is what Columbia really offered to me, and it was an amazing experience. And then of course, ironically, because I did know how to turn a camera on, I became one of the like de facto DPs in my year at film school. So then I did start shooting, a lot of stuff for people. And I knew at that point, I knew like next to nothing about lighting. And that was a process that was years and years of like trial and error and watching other people and everything. But coming from in an undergrad, and in high school, I did photography, photochemical photography. And so started to develop an eye for composition and that kind of thing, and for processing and printing and doing that kind of thing. So it was, there was one element of it that I could do. And then in undergrad I worked for a better part of a year as an assistant to a documentary cinematographer in Boston named Steve McCarthy, who really was an incredible mentor for me, and taught me a lot of tech stuff, but also a lot of how to compose yourself, in a professional environment, and how to deliver something that the client is after, this kind of really nitty gritty, great like life skills for getting by.
Yeah, that's something I've actually started asking more of guests on the show, is just like, when you're a department head, what are those kind of core soft skills that you have to lean in on? Because that's certainly not something they teach in film school, in most film schools.
Yeah, and it's been a big learning experience for me, particularly when I transitioned from very small indies, non-union features, where it felt like we were all kind of film school nerds, students, and it was like we all shared the kind of language and had a shared experience. And then starting to move into union shows where I'm working with crews where a lot of the Grip Electric crew are coming at it where that's primarily what they're interested in, but it's their job, and a lot of crews, but particularly in New York, are come from a lineage of other fathers and uncles and brothers and sisters who have also done it before them, and so they bring to it this kind of experiential knowledge that was incredible for me, and it was but I felt very intimidated by it at first. I had to get over this hang up of like going onto shows and having a gaffer or key grip who had done much bigger shows than me, and wonder like, oh, do they think my stuff looks bad, or do they, are they judging me behind my back? And I feel like at the end of the day, I realized like they just want somebody who's good to work with, like who's a decent person to them, who's like clear when they communicate, and that's the most important stuff, so that they kind of have a sense of what their day is going to look like, So, and then, I think one of the other big things I learned is if you can, the more you can trust your crew and include them creatively, the more they're gonna bring to the show. The more they're gonna bring to the movie in terms of ideas and effort and enthusiasm and all of that, which is just incredibly important. And I've always felt like I've been very collaborative and tried to pull ideas from anywhere. It's almost never at a movie. It's almost never one person's idea. It's like, so I want to introduce an idea and fairly certain it's a half-baked idea, but just for the sake for you to, whether you're the director or the gaffer, to say, well, what if we did this, or what if we, and just iterate on these ideas until you get to something that's a combination, or that other person's what if leads me to say, well, no, actually that's not going to work, because what it really needs to be is this. And now I'm getting more specific about what I'm trying to accomplish with this lighting setup or this camera move or something like that. So, communication is so critical. And particularly in, when you're talking about camera operating, I've done television for the past, 7 or 8 years, where typically I have 2 camera crews and I'm not operating the camera. And so the need to be very specific and clear about what the camera needs to do in a given scene is like of utmost importance. And I do miss being in the room with the actors and kind of like sharing that experience. It's really fortunate not to always have that, but what I gain, I feel like is a real perspective on what's being created, and it's just a necessary eye that you have to have on both cameras if you're running 2 cameras at a time.
Put you in like Video Village instead of on camera, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm always like one room away, and we're always on comm, so it's like a fluid communication. But there's things, there's things that operator can read, like when an actor walks into the room, and there's just a vibe that you can sense, that I might not necessarily be able to sense being one room removed, or which just may impact how we approach things.
Yeah, or like they can see something out of frame that you can't. And you're like, why did you do? Like it would have been wall. What
But no, or the good thing too is like, they back up into a corner as far as they think they possibly can, and they're jammed up and uncomfortable. And I'm like, yeah, but we need to get wider. And like, if I was there, I would be like, well, I can't go any wider. But the person who can't see where the camera's in the room is forcing the issue and thereby making it better.
Yeah.
Like trying to.
Oh, true. Yeah. I also imagine, like, because as a department head, by definition, you don't have as many reps in as, say, your gaffer on like a union thing. Like that guy's probably done 107 shows by the time you've done 2. Are there examples that you can think of on, whatever, maybe Murders, Russian Doll, even Acolyte, where like the crew taught you something, made your life easier potentially, like with a workflow hack or a lighting setup that you uncomplicated or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, there's a million instances. I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind a lot was gaffer Joel Minnick, who I did a few indie movies and a few projects with, who, when we would scout a location, I would approach it from, here's what I think the shot is, and here's how I want to light this shot, and here's where the lights need to be in the room to light the shot. Joel, who would know the script but wouldn't necessarily know all the shots, would just walk into the room and think, here's what the light is doing in the room right now, and here's what it'll be doing later today, or here's what it'll be doing if we turn these off, and thinking of it much more environmentally and holistically, which is a much, much smarter way to think about it. Because if you put it in those terms, you can create an approach that will work for many, many setups. And you can quickly make a decision about, well, if we're in this corner, all of these things are working to our advantage in terms of the light, in terms of the background, in terms of this, that, and the other. And so it makes, you're not trying to make every single specific decision at that moment, because you also don't know the answers. You think you know where the shots are, but then you don't know, the blocking changes or whatever. So if you look at it more holistically in terms of what the light's doing in a space, it just gives you a much better perspective on how to approach the lighting, and to always try to approach it from a position where whatever you're taking the most advantage of whatever the room or the space is giving you, and you're not like pushing, you're not working against it, basically.
Yeah, it is funny. Like I kind of similar to you when I went to film school. It was just the fact that I owned a workable camera, and actually, I also ended up being like the de facto After Effects guy. But you spend all this time thinking that you need to add, whatever, grab as many lights as you can, put them in interesting places, and then further along in your career, it's like, it's just the window. Let's still use the window.
How are we going to beat that? Yeah. I mean, so many embarrassing times where I've struggled to add a certain light, particularly when you're dealing with like day exterior or like day interior. If you don't have a lot of equipment to work with, struggle to rig or bring in a big light in a small space, and then when you get it in there, you realize it's giving you like a quarter of a stop. That's I just wasted 20 minutes for that. So I think the more you do it, the more you just are willing to kind of let go a little bit, and I think the work tends to look better for it.
Yeah, isn't there that documentary or whatever it is with Gordon Willis, and he's like, hold on, he's got a light bulb, and have you seen, know what I'm talking about? He's like, this is good, and he turns it off. He goes, that's better.
Yeah, exactly. That book Masters of Light is I reread that frequently, and there's so many things in that book, even though it's the interviews were all done, I guss probably in the early 80s. There's so much that kind of feels completely relevant in terms of I don't know, struggling with production or there's this whole thread in Masters of Light where several DPs bring up film stocks becoming too sharp and lenses becoming too sharp, and this is like in the early 80s, and how they like to use an older stock or a different set of lenses because they are disliking how pristine things are looking. It's like, wow, that's so familiar.
Yeah, it is weird how I have both versions of that book, the yellow cover and the newer cover. I guess there's a really good bookstore over here that has all that kind of stuff. But it is funny how we seem to, both as an audience and the people behind stuff. I say we. I've only worked on one actual feature film, but that was the second unit. How we push back on modernity. Anything that is new and exciting, very rarely, like it's like David Fincher and nobody else who are willing to like try a new shiny thing.
Yeah. Soderbergh will do it.
Yeah. Soderbergh's working on some 3D thing that no one's ever heard of, probably.
And I fully respect and appreciate that. And I want to have the opportunity to find a project where that aesthetic, serves it well, but I do find myself, leaning on a more filmic look, almost every time. And for Acolyte, I mean, that felt just obvious that was kind of the direction to go in. But I do think, the whole thing of texture, film grain and streaming is very tricky. And we were fortunate to have the resources and the ability to really test that with the Acolyte, where, we wanted to do a film grain, we wanted to add film grain in such a way that it was definitely apparent, and I've done it before in shows where it's, if you really look, it's there, but it's not, it's not really, it's not super present. And, but you realize what you're dealing with is you're applying grain, and then it's going through this compression pipeline, and it's sort of becoming something else. Sort of, the grain starts to interact with the compression in a way. And, it's when I was talking to Rob Bredow, who works at ILM, and he's a producer on the show, and I was like, is there a way for us just to do some outputs and test the grain? And he's like, well, just so there's I forget the exact number, but he's like, there's over 40 masters for this show, depending on what platform you're watching, and if you're watching it on an OLED TV, or if you're watching it in
Dolby
HBO,
Vision,
and not Dolby Vision, so you can really go into the weeds if you want to test all that stuff. So basically, we just ended up testing HDR 4K and then 1080, like the two most common formats, and seeing how much the grain survived. And it was a little it's a little tough to take when you're in the DI suite and you're looking at your pristine, like uncompressed image exactly how you want it, and then you look at like the way it's going to end up and
streaming on an iPad.
Yeah, most people would know the difference, but when you're looking at it side by side, it seems very apparent to me. But I have to say, I watched the show now, and maybe it's because I have a little distance from the DI, but I was pretty happy with how the compression turned out, at least on my TV and my bandwidth. And again, that's just so many variables. But it's like, I think the thing I feel like I need to broadcast to everybody is like, you got to watch an HDR, because actually the HDR version is the 4K version.
Right.
And if your TV is not set to HDR, it's going to send you the 1080 version.
Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating how many trims have to get made now, because it used to literally just be like, I'll make one DCP. We're done here. And now it's like, do you mean actually 40, or was that just like a number?
I do mean that much. Yeah.
Good Lord.
It was above 40. And I didn't get into what they all were, but my favorite joke on set was like, oh, this is going to look great on my watch.
Yeah. I've heard, apparently, I saw what looked like an official document, but I don't know, that I guess like Netflix has an algorithm where the image gets sent to your TV, and then there's processing done at the app level on your TV that overlays the grain on top of the streamed image. So it's always consistent. No matter what happens to the image underneath it, the grain is still correct.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure there's a pragmatic benefit to that, I would believe. I mean, I guess that what I've heard is from streamers is that they can get a little frustrated with grain because it messes with the compression algorithm, and it makes the
files bigger.
Makes the file bigger, right? Yeah. The bit rate. So yeah, I mean, I could see that being beneficial for everybody to add that afterward.
Yeah, it is. So I'll say I rarely break the fourth wall here, but for people listening, the reason it makes the file bigger is because mostly with compression algorithms, it'll compare frame to frame, and because of the grain, the algorithm sees a new frame every single time, so it encodes a new frame versus like cheating and saving a couple next to each other and whatever.
Yeah, keeping the same pixel value from one to the next because it's never the same. Right? Yeah.
I thought I had a good one there because I guess this is sort of related to, I can't remember where I was going to get there anyway, but when you were talking about learning on film, has that affected, like photography, has that affected the way that you expose your digital images at all, or do you treat them as two different I mean, they are two different mediums, but do you treat them differently?
Yeah, you definitely treat them differently. I mean, I guess my comparison now is more because when I was doing photography, it was all available light, and I've compared to the feature Love After Love that I shot on 16 millimeter, where I just really had to be protective of the shadows, and particularly in 16 millimeter where you can't really push that image around that much. So anything that was going below 2 stops underexposed, I felt like I had to be willing for it to potentially disappear, or be deep in the shadows in a way that I wouldn't necessarily be able to bring it back. So that's definitely like one of the baselines. And with digital, it's different for different cameras too. I mean, with the tests I've done on the Venice, which I've shot with a lot, I mean, it feels like if you can really underexpose it and bring it up, and if you're not like me, I'm not desperate for a super clean image. It's but I don't often find myself in a position where I need to do that though. I was just shooting some pickup shots for a movie, and we were doing like a car passed by at like last light. The idea being like we did not have a ton of resources, and we were kind of trying to do it available light. So that was almost like an interesting light study because we got to see from 8:40 p.m. when it was clearly too bright, but maybe you could time it down to night, to then the way that kind of the values between the ambient skylight straight ahead and the brighter side of the sky where the sun was setting, shifted, and where the sunset side of the sky stayed brighter much longer, the ambient started to drop. So our fill light just started to go away, and our shadows just started to get really, really, really crunchy and deep. And that's an instance where, we were shooting Venice too, where I was like, there's a point at which, it was like 9:05 or something where it felt like it was not salvageable anymore, those shadows. I don't know. I mean, yeah, that is I feel like I'm just constantly learning about light, how light is in different environments. And it's just kind of fascinating how principles are always the same, but the nuances can just be really different from space to space.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I decided to, just as like a experiment, only shoot black and white, not for like work, but just for my own personal photography. I only shot black and white, and just as a light study. And I became very annoyed when I started shooting color again, because it was like, now before it was just shape, and now I got to deal with color and stuff. And it's like the more fucked up it looked, the better the black and white looked, It was, and then you get into color, and it's like, oh, everything's flat.
Yeah, it's true. Well, that's where reversal comes into play. Like Ektachrome is kind of nice that way. It has you get color, but it's just so high contrast. You can kind of define things better. But
yeah. Oh, I remember what I was going to say earlier. It was just about the streaming thing, and this is why I always tell people to buy physical media. I was elated when they released Andor on 4K Blu-ray, because I assumed they were just going to keep that on Disney Plus, and we were done here. And I'm hoping more streamers do that, like for even for shows that people didn't really like love or whatever. It would still be cool to see a physical media release, because Disney's always been on the forefront of that with those crazy plastic clamshell VHS tapes. But B, like, I think it'll get more people involved in film. You know, if they're not going to go to the theater, the movie's in a theater for 2 minutes. You know, like give them something that they could share with their friends or watch at home, and then also see the pristine version of it. You know, preferably.
Sure. I know. I mean, God, I miss the idea of owning the copy, like the collector's edition of something, and you know, having it whenever you want it, and not worrying about whether it's going to disappear one moment, you know, or to the next, and knowing what it's going to look like.
Yeah,
I agree. That would be great.
Well, and especially because, like, when you earlier you said, like, I don't think the audience can tell. Definitely not with a DVD, but even with regular Blu-ray like, it looks way better. You wouldn't think, even with people who have really fast internet and like a great TV, just the regular 1080p Blu-ray on that screen looks noticeably better.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I love some of my Criterion Blu-rays of, you know, McCabe and Mrs. Miller is like one of my favorites, and it opens this interesting question where, I mean, I love the way it looks on Blu-ray on my TV, but I mean, if to be fair, it is a different experience from watching a print of it in a movie theater. I'm not saying it's worse. I'm just saying it's different, and there's some things I like about it. You know, there's the grain is very present in the Blu-ray, and how the shadows are a bit deeper and richer, and I don't know, I don't hate that about it either. You know,
it's almost clinical, and like I know what you mean with these are all Criterions, all these ones, and it's some of these restorations, because they take a relatively hands-off approach. They fix what's broken, but you know, it's like that. You're right. That scanned grain can be pretty. It's like looking at that print under a microscope versus a projection, which kind of softens it out.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But it gets into this whole question of like, well, what is the ultimate, like, what did it look like? You know, you know, when I was researching, prepping the Acolyte, my friend turned me on to all these print scans of you know, A New Hope and Empire, and
oh, cool.
Where people bought old prints and did a scan and you know, released it with no noise reduction, tried to create something that was like as faithful to the original print as possible. Although, you know, when I look at it, I mean, they're really interesting to look at. They're very grainy and very noisy, and so it does make me wonder, like, was that really what it looked like in the theater, you know, in 1977? It's just hard to say. Because I mean, how do you compare this? You know,
well, and if that print got run through, like, you know, I wasn't around in 77, but you know, it was just basically on a loop for months. Like, I imagine if you weren't there first day, is that the real version? Like, is your memory of it, you know, in 1978, you know, the real version, or is it the people who were in line for the first 12 hours? You know?
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. I mean, all this stuff. That's just a fluid media that we work in.
Were you given any kind of fun? I imagine you were a Star Wars fan growing up.
Yeah.
Were you given kind of any fun access in prep for the show that, like, you know, did Disney kind of go like, all right, here's the vault, go have fun?
I mean, not in an extensive way. Well, you know, when, you know, episode 4 and 5 take place on a forest planet, and so we looked at a lot of behind the scenes photos of Dagobah, you know, from Empire, and that was helpful because of creating a forest on a set is, I think, extremely difficult, because you have to find this combination of something that has like a density that feels like you're looking into forever basically when you look forward, but not being so dense that there's no depth, to the space. And, it was interesting to kind of like examine how they had accomplished it and how they lit it. And then, that sparks discussion about like, well, how much is our planet like that planet, and how much do we want to differentiate it, but I think one of the things I love about Star Wars is like the Dagobah is not, it's not realistic. I mean, I don't know, when when I watch it, I believe it, like I'm there. But if I stop it and I really look at it, I sense that it's a fabrication, but I don't really care. I mean, I kind of like that. It's part of the magic of it, so that becomes this challenging metric of like, well, what are we aiming for here? We're not really aiming for pure realism. I mean, we're creating a cinematic, fantastical space, so what are the requirements for that?
Yeah, that was something that, yeah, well, first of all, my recollection of Dagobah is like pond, tree line, black. Like it's not, you can't see anything past there. Yeah. But I did want to know kind of what your guys's again, in kind of like pre-production, setting up the look or the vibe of the show, I guess. Were you looking at, because technically this is like a what would you call it? Vintage. What am I trying to say? I'm blanking on the term. When it's old, but it wasn't made back then. What the hell is that called? It's hundreds of years before we know. So were you guys trying to lean more into, I don't know, like the look of the prequels? Were you not referencing other material at all? I'm just thinking timeline wise. If it looked like Andor, that would be different than
right. We never took such a kind of literal approach, I think, to the placing the show in terms of look in the span of the timeline of the universe. I also feel like that it's the progression of technology and culture in the Star Wars universe is not does not parallel ours, in any way. So it's like I felt a little bit like we got to kind of take a step back from that and I more just really connect with the look of the first three films, episode 4, 5, and 6, and as I was like doing the research and rewatching them, it just struck me very powerfully how I realized how much the films were kind of embedded in me, like just in my memory as being a kid, but also like a sort of my aesthetic memory, where there's something that really resonates with me, like these kind of earth tones and and this sense of like a science fantasy world where there are ships, but they're not pristine, they're not clean, they have dirt on them, they feel like they've been around and been banged up, and I always love that about it. But then at the same time, you've got like the big battle at the end of Empire where it's like deep fields of blue and like orange light, in the same frame, like pushing against each other, and so something that doesn't feel like perfectly earthbound and realistic, but also has this kind of great saturated color to it. So I mean, that's the stuff that I wanted to bring to the show. And then there's the whole like martial arts component to it, and that really informed the camera work. I mean, both like Leslie talked a lot about how like always posed the rhetorical question of like, how would George Lucas think about approaching shooting this scene,
right.
And basically, the idea behind it being like, let's aim towards like an elegant simplicity, let's let like less is more, and that for the martial arts work also that also held true in terms of the things we were looking at from, this like 70s films like Come Drink with Me and Lady Snowblood, and then on to like Kill Bill and Crouching Tiger, which are granted a bit more sophisticated with the camera, but I do think generally what the camera's trying to do is highlight and represent the fight choreography in as dynamic and also like clear a way as possible.
Yeah.
You want to see what these performers are doing. It's incredible like feats of agility and strength that they're able to pull off. And I mean, that's part of the magic of it, right? And so it became, when we were designing those sequences, if we were going to move the camera, we were almost always trying to move it on one axis, meaning like we're going to move lateral or we're going to push in or we're going to pull out. We're not going to try to go diagonal or wrap around or something like that. There are moments, but it's like, I felt like those were choices that felt appropriate for that. It was like we were really trying to restrain ourselves, and which is challenging because the way the action sequences were pre-visualized was through this system that was completely new to me, which is and I know it's been in a lot of films now, but like it took me a minute to wrap my brain around this idea that they were basically having our stunt doubles perform the fight sequence, and they recorded it in 3D, like did a 3D recording of the motion of it, with like the tracking suits and everything, and
so not on set.
So not on set. Well, it would be like the set doesn't exist yet, basically, right? So you get a motion capture of everybody's fight choreography that they recorded in their kind of workshop, and then you could put it in a 3D model of the set. Could stage it into the virtual space, and then you could take our stunt action design team had a Ronin with a virtual camera on it, basically a sensor and a monitor, and so you could go through and change lens. You could walk through the space and like kind of place the lens where you want it to, and then run that part of the fight sequence, and then capture it, and then watch it back, and then make adjustments, and do infinite takes on it where you're not burning out any actors or anything because it's just a motion recording. And you're seeing what it looks like in the set. You're kind of staging it from the best place for the light, and you're getting the right lens. But I guess to come back around to what I was saying, the temptation when basically you're prevising that way is like your camera is here in your hand, so you can do whatever you want with it.
Right.
You could swing up, swing down, you could wrap around, you can do really amazing, cool, dynamic stuff with it. And a lot of it was like trying to, and our action designer, Chris Cowan, was amazing, like just brilliant, and also a fantastic camera operator, was trying to like just pull him back a little bit and be like, well, let's just try to track with it, in one direction, let's try to just move up, down, up to down or something like that. And then when we shot it for real, often the prior, if we could make a camera movement work on a dolly or on a crane so that it had that like real sense of control and precision, we would do it. And then if not, then Chris would do it on the Ronin, which was also had an amazing series of advantages too, because Chris knows the fight choreography so well. And so, he would run a certain bit of choreography where he's operating the camera, and he'd roll and run it, and then get to the end of it, and then just reset immediately, like talk to the performers, make a few adjustments, and then do it again. And he'd do like 6 takes in a row, with slight adjustments. And so the efficiency with like capturing that, and the fact that he can he can move the camera so quickly, with just being, holding it with your body rather than trying to push, a dolly, it's 500 pounds, or trying to get a crane to like move through space, so there's certain moments where that was the only way to capture the shot. But I think because Chris is a great operator, and because we were aiming for this aesthetic, I think that it all cuts together seamlessly, which is great. And I was very happy with.
Yeah, I mean the fight choreography, or not the choreo, but just those scenes certainly stand. Like even in the trailer, I remember there's I can't remember who's fight. I think it's from episode 2. Where they're fighting in like kind of a dirt round, and just even in the trailer, I was like, that looks, well, I think my brain was primed for it, but it was very like Matrix-esque, and I know you guys referenced Chinese martial arts movies a lot, so I guess and so did the Matrix, so there you go.
Right,
but,
exactly. Yeah.
But then you had Carrie-Anne Moss in there, so I was like, which I gotta say, she's literally on a billboard out here for Disney Plus. Just her, and the dude from The Bear. And then episode 1 comes out, and I was like, you guys, like, I'm glad we've gotten now at the time of this recording up to episode 4. I'm like, all right, we are getting a little more Carrie Ann Moss, but boy, that was a bait and switch.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry. No, I mean that was that was going into it. Leslie was kind of like, I want to have someone very powerful get murdered.
Just off rip.
just let's just get going. Like
Did you? It's funny because I don't think it was. Speaking of advertising, it wasn't necessarily, at least as far as I saw, advertised as a murder mystery, but that's what it is. And you had shot those before in other shows. And were you, like, did you just because of Leslie, or was it? Did you? Let me ask a question in this whole ramble. Did you? Were you chosen to be the DP, well, one of the DPs for this show because of your relationship with Leslie, or in the kind of similar genre that the show is?
It was really my relationship with Leslie. You know, we've done Russian Doll together, and it was a really fun collaboration, and it was an amazing.
Right, because you guys didn't do Murders together. Sorry.
Yeah, we didn't do Murders. We didn't. Yeah, but you know, there is that same narrative challenge of like, how do you know, John Hoffman on Murders, I was always amazed at the way he would structure things, and he could talk about it much more eloquently than I could, but I feel like the approach is like, you know, you have to figure out the ending, and then you just have to like go backwards and sort of complicate things, you know, so that you've got every episode, you've got a new suspect, you know, a new thing to pursue that has to be, you have to believe that person could be the killer, you know, that has to be plausible. But then you have to show at the end, you know, how you have to reveal some new information that takes you in a new direction. It's which is, it is what the Acolyte does, in a really fun way. And that's one of the things I loved about it. It's like, it's got a structure that just keeps pulling you through from episode to episode, you know?
Yeah. Well, and, going, kind of heavy pivot, I guess, but I had an article just came out today that I read, where you were talking about like the use of color and making sure all these spaces felt like their own individual spaces. And I got to be honest, the first 3 episodes I just kind of watched as a fan, and then last night I actually watched episode 4 critically. And in my head, I felt like I had constantly seen sets, and then there's like a bunch of shots of like outdoor forest in stuff like there seems to be a lot of location shoots, but also you guys have done a great job of differentiating between these like each episode feels like it's a completely different thing visually.
Yeah. I mean, you know, part of it is the nature of just like being in a different environment, but and you know what helps too, honestly, is, you know, James' friend shot the other 4 episodes. He shot episode 3, which is, you know, a lot of it is on Brendock. And so that became his world to kind of design his way, which I think is cool. Like, you know, Leslie and I definitely, you know, built the guidelines for the style of the show. And, you know, we put together this big presentation where we got, you know, I don't know, something like 80 people together, department heads, operators, everybody, you know, and like kind of dispersed the wisdom of like, this is what we're aiming for. And this is kind of the goalpost of the look of the show. But then I think, you know, when you move beyond that, like you want to make sure, like I said, you know, like that everybody feels like they have some room to be creative and you know, define their own look. And it is necessary for, you know, episode 3, like being a flashback, being a different space. But it also, I don't think it all like fits together really nicely. But, you know, I mean, what I ended up doing is just kind of mapping out the spaces and doing a little, you know, timeline in Keynote. I love using Keynote for all my notes and stuff. And just almost doing like swatches of color and color references and you know, movie references for every space. And then you get to kind of see it all side by side, and you see the kind of color palette of what you're going to travel through from beginning and it becomes very apparent if you feel like you're repeating yourself, or you start to make associations with like certain colors in certain spaces, or things resonate together. So I mean, I love trying to find ways to visually like take a take a bigger, or the grand view of everything and try to get some perspective on things. Because obviously the moment you kind of get into pre-production, it's so much about getting into the nitty-gritty and solving all the little problems and making everything work. And it's very easy to lose sight of the big picture.
Yeah. When you were putting together that I guess show Bible, what were the things that you knew you didn't want to do?
We knew, camera movement was a big thing where we knew we wanted to really understand what the camera was saying every time it moved. And, we looked at examples of shots from films where it felt like the camera was doing some really cool stuff. And there's some real like craft and artistry to the execution of the shot, but I couldn't tell you what that shot was trying to do for me, and
Right.
emotionally or so that was a thing. We look at a scene, from Empire where Luke's hanging upside down in that creature's cave. I can't remember the name of it. And it's like almost every shot in that scene is just like a static shot. And then the one camera move is when he's using the force to grab the lightsaber, and it's like the saber's shaking in the snow pile and the camera's just pushing in, slowly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. That's like, this is what's important. This is what, we want to resonate with the audience. So, that was the kind of thing that we're doing. Color palette also, like trying to strike this, thread this needle where we are, using not too many colors in the frame, but not being afraid of bright color, finding bright colors that are complementary to each other, and tending towards kind of primary, rich, deep colors, whether it's red or blue or, so those kinds of things, and also not losing sight of the fact that, this is a story about family, and this is a story about relationships that feel like familiar relationships, and this is a story about people struggling to overcome things within themselves, and like let's not lose sight of that amongst all the spaceships and creatures and all that stuff, which is, I think that's very much like the world that Leslie and I come from. So I trying to impart that upon the crew of like let's think of what the small part of this story is, and then build upon that, I guess.
Yeah. To your point about camera movement, one of my favorite facts that I like to remind people is like the silent era had a lot of really interesting camera movement. And when they had to start recording audio, everything got locked off because now that camera was 100 pounds, or like Technicolor, it's like 3 cameras strapped. It's like no camera movement.
Yeah.
So there's this weird dip where it's like really interesting, very static, really interesting when the cameras got digital. I know you guys shot on like a 100-yard stage there was no volume, right? It was just like VFX extensions everywhere.
Yeah, no volume, and not that many VFX extensions. Like a lot.
I should say when necessary.
When necessary, yeah. A lot of like painted backdrops and
Was there a particular? Everyone that I've spoken to who has shot on a volume on this podcast has said it is not that easy. Was that a consideration? Like it's maybe potentially a little more effort than it's worth.
I think that was definitely a consideration. I do think when I came onto the show, that things were starting to gear in a direction that was a non-volume direction. And when we started to talk about what the look for the show is and talking with a production designer who loved the kind of an old school approach, it all kind of made sense. Like it didn't feel like, oh, we should push back and try to get volume for this, that, or the other thing. So it's sort of nice when your options get limited because your approach, becomes more specific and streamlined,
Well, to your point about having the virtual camera for previs, when you're just holding, like you said, like a tracker, you can move it in a way that the camera would never, being given unlimited options is rarely good for you.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's great to make choices and then always be open to the fact that you might make different choices on set as you kind of, things kind of reveal themselves to you.
Yeah. Well, and I did want to ask, because I knew you guys used printed backdrops. And this is kind of inside baseball, but like, what do you have to go through to get a backdrop, especially with digital cameras being so pristine? What do you have to go through to make a backdrop look realistic? Like, is there an optimum blurriness? You know, were you sitting in Photoshop going like, all right, 50% Gaussian print, let's see it, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, they get used in so many different ways, so it's a little bit of like a case by case. You know, like outside the cantina, in the first big fight sequence, it's all a painted backdrop all around there. So that's very overexposed. So that was, you know, you could kind of like, you could make it look more realistic that way. One of the most challenging ones I think is in episode 4 and parts of 5 too, there's a section of Kofar, the forest set, which was like the little corner. It's the moth field. That's basically where the moths come into the umber moths come into the show, and
The one that gets cut in half.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like where we ran out of space basically, and everybody's just like, well, we'll just make it really dark, and it's supposed to be spooky anyway, and so I was like, yeah, well, yeah, kind of, but we're not doing the show where things fully fall off into darkness. Like, we want to feel the world even though it's night, and so that space, basically the existing set was a bunch of vertical, fairly small trees, which is very different from the rest of the forest. And then the painted backdrop, we was very like impressionistic in a way, where it was just verticals, like dark verticals, and then grays around the verticals, and the verticals kind of recede, they get smaller and more faint, and to suggest the kind of distance. And I mean, it worked really well, because what was painted mirrored the existing thing very, very well. It helped trick the eye. All the tricks of like, the density of the trunks becoming more and more faint as they get smaller, to suggest, and we were obviously adding atmosphere, and we were keeping it fairly dark, so it's some of it, and it's testing too. I had the good fortune of being able to do like fairly extensive pre-lighting on all these sets, and it's so helpful to kind of sit in a space with a camera without the pressure of making your day and try things while just have stand-ins, walk through set, try different colors, try different intensities. And then I would record all that stuff, and then I'd sit on it for a day or two and come back and look at the footage. And oftentimes new things would occur to me, just having a little bit of time to kind of sit with it. So, we change color temp, or go maybe a little bit brighter. It's all these little improvements, that kind of can make things work better. Yeah, and yeah, it was great.
What was your shooting package?
We had a Venice 2, and then we shot with Arri Alpha anamorphic lenses. So they're, full format, 2x squeeze, incredible looking lens. It's like really spectacular, kind of blurry fall off on the edges of the frame. Like very little distortion. Yeah, they were great. We tried to stay on the middle to wider end. Basically, the widest on that is a 32, which we used quite a bit when we went out on location and did landscape shots. It looked incredible for that. And then when we were on the stage, we tried not to go any wider than a 40. And then the 63, I feel like, was our hero close-up lens. We did very few extreme close-ups. It was our whole kind of single show.
63 on a full frame sensor, that's probably pretty good. That's like I'm just doing mental math. Like, that's probably like a 40 on Super 35 vibes wise.
I think so. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, I can't do the math.
Oh, me neither. I'm going off pure vibes only.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, I could definitely pick your brain for much longer, but I know you got like a tighter schedule, so I'll let you go. But I really appreciate you spending the time to chat with me about the show. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it through to completion, because now the way it's paced is so frustrating, like in a fun way, but it's so frustrating where it's like episode 4, it's like, oh shit, it's the bad guy. Okay, we're done. Like, I gotta.
That's right. Yeah. That's Leslie, man. She knows how to bring people in. No, thank you. So this has been really fun. It's a fun way to talk about the show and talk about cinematography in general.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Well, next time you do some, just please let me know, and we'll have it right back on.
Will do.
All right, later, buddy.
All right, take care.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so on Patreon by going to frameandrefpod.com, where you can get all the episodes, and clicking the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.